came into the family through Jesus' precious blood. You tasted of his goodness and his love. He showered you with blessings. He's building you a home. But somehow on your journey, you're standing all alone. You've wandered far from homeland, down paths so dark and cold, in search of all the treasures you could hold. Your freedom brought you bondage, rebellion brought you fear. But Jesus stands behind you, and homeland is so near. Come home, your Father really loves you. Come home, it's where you ought to be. It's a place of peace and comfort, a shelter from the storm. Don't wait another moment, come home. Remember how it used to be when fellowship was sweet. The times we'll spend in worship at his feet. You know it doesn't really matter how long you've been away. Just let his spirit cleanse you and be restored today. Today, come home. Your Father really loves you. Come home. It's where you ought to be. It's a place of peace and comfort, a shelter from the storm. Don't wait another moment, come home. For it's a place of peace and comfort, a shelter from the storm. Don't wait another moment, for he stands with arms wide open. Please don't wait another moment. Come home, my child. Come home.
Thank you, Nick. All right. Do we pass the papers out? You have those? Okay, we're continuing in Proverbs. By the way, I forgot. I saw the papers up here, and I forgot. It's Nazareth's birthday today. 14? I thought we were 13, but your sister corrected me when I was giving her candy. So 14 years old. Great. Happy birthday. We're starting a new subject. We talked about anger for quite a few weeks, and people are starting to get mad about that, so we're moving on from that, okay? Figured you're either going to listen and change or you get upset. If you get upset, we'll just stop talking about it. So during the summer, I think we talked about the virtuous woman. We looked at several weeks, Proverbs chapter 31. We're going to talk tonight about the virtuous man. Virtuous man. There is. They're harder to find in this society in which we live. It's really, I call it the virtuous man, but it's going to be really about protecting ourselves from immorality. And that's what the Bible talks about. That's a man's primary problem. Now, so you ladies don't tune out. It help you too. It has to do with you also. What society has done, it's blurred the boundaries of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. It's just totally blurred it. They wanted there to be no difference between a man and a woman. And by the way, there is a difference. That's why there's confusion. We have men now that want men. We want women that want women. We want men wanting to become a woman. Women wanting to become a man. A man trapped in a woman's body who likes a woman. You say, you're making this up. No, they have those designations. Okay? I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, but I'm attracted to women. I'm a mental homosexual. No, they're confused. And our society has promoted that instead of trying to help people that are stuck in that type of thing. Let's not fool ourselves and try to be politically correct. And I think if you've been here for a while, we're not really good at that around here. We want to be biblically correct. It's controversial to say men and women are different. It's just common sense. That's not degrading to women. That's not exalting to men. God has made us both different, and that's okay. We don't like that. I remember, it's funny. We had a child in my wife's, I was going to say old age, but I don't want to sleep on the couch. We had a child in our life, older in life. We had Emily when my wife was, I think, 40, maybe 41. She's 25 now. She's been reversing in age since then. It's working out pretty nicely for us. But so I had 3 boys and 3 girls that time. And it was funny. The difference in men and women, it's just blatantly easy. So my wife was at the hospital. She had the new baby, so I'm going to take the children to go see their new sister. So the first group I took were the boys, Jack, Josiah, and Jack. And so Emily's about 9, so... Oh, my bad. So she's about 0, so my wife is 40. The boys are a little bit younger. Stephen's probably in his teen years. Jack and Josiah are getting there. And they went in there, and it's like, they put the baby in that plastic tub, and it's like, oh, yeah, there she is. And that's nice. How you doing, Mom? And, we were there for a few minutes, like, all right, we'll see you later. We take them home. I bring the girls there. The first thing the girls do is they take Emily out of the baby thing. Where's the clothes? They had all these clothes, and they're changing her. And does she look good in this outfit? Does she look good in that outfit? At that age, they don't look good in anything, all right? They look good with their face covered. But look, they were obviously different. Men and women are different. We have to understand that. We're motivated differently. We saw that. God talked about the virtuous woman, some principles. But what about the man? As men, we need to be men of character and virtue also. We have a whole world of sin that comes at us every single day. By the way, men excuse their actions sometime on the fact that, well, I'm a man. So it's okay for me to be rude. Can I preach? No. It's okay for us to be dirty and not have manners and to be selfish and think about ourselves. No, none of that's right. You can blame it on being a man, but the fact of the matter is, it's a character issue. And we're following society. And by the way, most men don't grow up, but that's a story for another day. We never have that excuse as a Christian. The world is not supposed to define what a man is. The world is not supposed to define what a lady is. I'm sorry. That's not how it's supposed to be. Fact of the matter is, if we don't know the Bible, we don't even know what a real man is. Now, I think you have a blank on your paper. The greatest temptation and the greatest hindrance to a man being virtuous is our flesh. You thought I was going to say wives, didn't you? Flesh. It's our flesh. Because men and women are different, we are motivated differently. Now, there are sins that are a temptation to everybody, but in men, some sins are a little more of a temptation. The sin shows itself most, the sin we're talking about, the hindrance in our flesh, in immorality. Being immoral. By the way, our society many, many years ago, that it used to happen, but it wasn't right. Now it's celebrated. Now it's like, that's just normal. That's just how things work. God doesn't think that way. What kind of immorality? Whether, you got a couple things down there. Physically. Any contact outside of marriage that is not with your spouse. It's wrong. Okay? It's immoral. Well, what about visually? Next. Pornography. I read an article somewhere. Again, when you're at church, you get all these emails from all these Christian groups and these magazines. But it was from a Christian group, and they did a study. Now, you have to understand, whenever you get you get statistics like this, they accept anybody who says they're Christian, whether or not we would consider them Christian. They have the right doctrine. They just say they're Christian. And they say in the Christian community, for those who claim to be Christian, addiction and viewing pornography is no different than those who do not claim to be Christians. Now, again, that's a wide scope of people that aren't really truly born again. They just, yeah, I'm a Christian. But again, it is an issue. Pornography. By the way, that sin will ruin you. It'll ruin your marriage. It'll ruin everything about you. Okay? And you don't want to get involved with that. It's a secret sin. And really, it soils your soul and it can spoil your marriage. Or mentally. Mentally. Lust in the heart. Jesus said that if a man lusts after a woman in his heart, he's already committed adultery. That's pretty heavy duty. See, grace holds us to a higher standard. Maybe it's because Jesus knew, well, first of all, he can say what he wants. He's God, and he's right. But I'm sure that a person that has struggles with that in their mind, eventually, if there's an option, it's going to lead itself in actions. So we need to be very careful. And let me say this up front. I'm going to say some things, and some things here are not. I'm not going to be harsh. I'm going to try to be really kind. But some of the things the Bible say can be very scary about this sin. And whenever you have a group this size, there's some people I'm sure that have been involved in some of those sins before, and maybe you're saved and you've got over it from the grace of God. You ought to be the ones to say amen. Now, don't be afraid of some of the things we're saying, except to be afraid to not let it happen again. And by the way, if there's some people that have been involved in some of these sins, you can overcome them by the grace of God, but there are some consequences sometimes that you just have to overcome that maybe make life a little tougher. It is better to go on with God than without Him. But I'm not saying this to condemn those that maybe have been involved in something. I'm saying this to help us to understand. I remember when I was in Bible college, a man got up and preached in chapel there, and he preached on, he went through Proverbs. He talked about immorality, and he's called it the scarlet sin, and really the things he said and the things he showed and some of the things we'll look over, it was scary. It scared me. Like, we got to be careful here. By the way, that man is no longer in the ministry. He's actually in jail for something he did along these lines. So we have to be very, very careful. The punishment he talked about is something, and listen, none of us are so strong that it's something, I don't have to worry about that. You better all worry about it. I better worry about it. I'll give examples as we go through this, but I know some that have fallen in this type of thing, and I don't think, what a rotten, no good for nothing heathen. I think it's bad. You know what I think? It reminds me, I had better be very careful. I don't ever want to do that. By God's grace, I'm not going to, but you know what? If I'm not careful, I could do that. If you're not careful, you could do that. We need to be very, very careful, and that's why we're looking at this. We mentioned the verse there is in Matthew. I quote, I kind of told you what it says, but there it is about if we just look on a woman. Our society is ruining love and marriage with this type of adulterous behavior. Fact of the matter is, the statistics are staggering. Just let me give you a few by way of introduction. In a recent Barna study, they're a Christian group, 4 out of 10 Americans believe that adultery is morally acceptable. I think it's okay. Morally acceptable. That shows you how far our society has fallen from our Christian roots. For Christians, you say, well, Christians, obviously, no Christian would believe that. In their study, that number was 1 out of 10. Now think about that. 10% of people they surveyed who claimed to be Christians, and this group is probably a little closer to the number of Christians they have, they do Barna than other groups. 1 out of 10 Christian people said, what's wrong with adultery? By the way, we talk about the fact that homosexuality is a sin. It's wrong. It's not condemning, it's what the Bible says. Can I just tell you this? So is adultery. Oh, people get out, that's right, it's wrong. I don't think that's right. A man shouldn't marry a man. That's right. And you shouldn't be an adulterer either. Okay? We got to be very careful. Most researchers come to some general conclusions that over 1/3 of married men will cheat on their spouse. That is scary. Nearly 1/4 of all married women will cheat on their husbands. Makes sense because it actually takes two to tango. That more than 50% of all marriages will be impacted by one of their spouses being unfaithful in some way. Isn't that scary? Back in the 60s, it was usually the husband who was unfaithful. Today, researchers are finding that women are just as likely as men to have an affair. Many years ago, I was driving into work, I was listening to news, and there was some study, and it was like 65% of women they surveyed who had not been adulterous said that they would give it serious consideration under the right circumstances. Because things just aren't going well in our society. It's funny, Christians are the problem, but how come things are getting worse and worse? See, we call them restrictions. By the way, doing what the Bible said is not a restriction. It's a protection. We're talking about joy on Sunday nights through Philippians. Joy comes as a result of doing what God wants, not doing our own thing. But we have problems. 55%. Barna, who did a survey of men, and I kind of mentioned this, they said 55% of men who claim to be Christians say they look at pornography at least once a month. 35% cheated on their spouses. We could go on and on, but I'm sure we understand that it's an epidemic. As our society has loosened its grip, they put this stuff in movies, in your windows, this, that, the other. They've loosened those morals, and then they wonder why society is so bad. Those seeds were planted a long time ago, and now they're bearing bitter fruit. Proverbs speaks much about this. How can a man stay pure and virtuous in the society in which we live? And by the way, I think you can. Just because, look, if it was 90% of marriages have an affair, if you're a Christian, I don't think you have to be anywhere near that. God came to give us abundant life. Now, I'm going to give these things, but ladies, listen up too, because some of this would apply to you, of course. Realize, number one, realize that it all starts inwardly, so we must guard our minds. It all starts inwardly, so we must guard our minds. Romans talks about being transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, if you can be transformed by the renewing of your mind, it stands to reason that you can be corrupted by the opposite, letting garbage in your mind. Look at the verse in Proverbs chapter 6. There are several passages in Proverbs. We'll look at some of them a little more in depth at other times. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 25, it says, "Lust not after her beauty," where? "In thine heart. Neither let her take thee with thine eyelids." We'll look at that first part. "Lust not after her beauty in thy heart." Now look, men are attracted by sight. We'll get there in a minute. Okay? There was a pastor in Washington, Pastor Dallas Dobson. That's the church. He started the church where our kids are going up to Washington for the basketball tournament. We were there on vacation. He was preaching one time, and he got up, and he said, "The most beautiful of all God's creation is a woman." I think he's right. Now, before you get a big head, he said number 2 is the Harley Davidson, okay? So I don't know quite where and he said it was a close race there, you know? I heard a guy, I probably shouldn't say this, I heard a guy say one time, the guy was preaching, he goes, you know, he was an old-time preacher, he goes, "Man, I have married all kinds of women." He goes, "And everybody that comes down that aisle is beautiful. Some of them barely get there, but they all are beautiful." But listen, men are motivated by sight, and they'll see some girl, and listen, you can't help but walk by, and some girls are maybe for some reason, you can't dwell on that. You start thinking about it, you let it get in your mind, and it starts to ruminate. We often say when someone gets away from God or is involved in disobedience, we say, they fell into sin. I don't like that word. Now, sure enough, I'm going to read somewhere in the Bible, and there it is, but I don't like it because that's not what happens. No one falls into sin, okay? It's a slow process. It starts up here. No one is reading their Bible and praying and serving God and living holy. The next day, they're immoral. Doesn't happen that way. There's a slow process that takes you to the place where you will allow that to happen in your life. You know where it starts? It starts in the mind. You need to be very careful. It starts small and starts to grow and continues until it's finally acted upon. Sin is not a slow fall. It's not a sudden fall. It's a slow walk. We head towards it. Now, we can't help temptation from showing up on the path of life on which we live, but we can sure stop it from taking root in our heart. By what? Just being careful. Some of the things we learn as we go on here, but the starting place is the mind. Men are motivated by sight. Okay? If a guy's going out somewhere, he doesn't, I was going to say he doesn't, but there's sure enough somebody here does. But if you do, I'm praying for you. He doesn't spend 2 hours in front of the mirror, is my hair in the right place? Listen, I got that nailed. I wake up in the morning, every hair is in place. Now, I don't know what place it is because it left a long time ago, but all my hair is good. But ladies, you make yourself look good and this and all that stuff, and you smell good and all that stuff. Why? That guys like that. Okay? And I'm not saying you're being bad. I'm just saying, because you want your husband, it's like, wow, mamacita, yeah, you look good. Okay? Ladies, you don't see some guy, now you say, oh, he's handsome and all that, but it's like, whoa, baby doll. No, you're not like that. There's other motivations for you, although you want us to not look like we got run over by a truck. But it starts with what we allow ourselves to see and what we allow ourselves to dwell on. Look at the verse in Job. Okay? This describes it perfectly. Job 31:1. I made a covenant with my eyes. In other words, I made an agreement with my eyes. Okay? Why then should I look upon a maid? Does it say that? No, it doesn't. Thank you, Jerry. You're good. It says, why then should I what? Think upon a maid. Hold on. Why did he make a covenant of his eyes if he's making a covenant that he won't think upon a maid? Because where does the mind start? It starts in what you what? See. And once you see it, you have to make an agreement that I'm not going to dwell on it. Now in our society, especially when things get a little warmer, to the embarrassment of our society, women take more and more of their clothes off. And you can't do anything about that. If you're in the store, you're this, except one thing, don't look. Sometimes they may walk by, turn your head the other way. If you stop and allow yourself to look, therefore, you're going to start what? Thinking about a maid. I was driving somewhere. I was coming back from visiting pastor. I already know what I was going to be teaching, but I was visiting pastor. I visit him every Monday. I was coming back, and some lady was crossing the street, and she wasn't dressed right. So I did, and she was right by a construction area over there. And I was driving. I saw her, so I didn't really pay attention to her. But there was a construction guy there with, be slow and all that. Oh, he was paying attention. He had his sign up, but his eyes were right following her across the street. Okay? You know what? Can I just tell you something? He wasn't looking at her crossing the street thinking, trust and obey, for there's no. He wasn't thinking happy thoughts about Jesus. Okay? We allow ourselves that. Job's covenant was that I'm not going to allow my eyes to continue to dwell on something that's going to cause me to think thoughts that are not right. What we think starts with what we see. If we don't want to think wrong, we don't want to see wrong. Don't allow yourself the second look. Okay? You say, okay, well, I'll make that first look worth it. No, don't do that either. Okay? It doesn't work. Don't be loose with your eyes. And by the way, you have to be very careful. We can't control how a lady looks, but we can't control where or if we look. David is a prime example of this. 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 2. We know the whole concept with David and Bathsheba. Where did it start? Of course, he didn't go to war. Okay, I get that, but still. Verse 2, came to pass in the evening time that David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman washing herself. Bath time. His house was probably higher up on the hill. Now, maybe she wasn't completely bath, like, whatever, bubble bath or anything, but somehow she was washing herself, and there was something there, but David didn't quit looking. He should have said, "Whoa, cowboy," went back inside. But he didn't. Hopefully, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, he didn't know she was already there and it wasn't planned out. And the woman was very beautiful to look upon. When they're not dressed right, duh. Okay? We got to be very careful with this stuff. Why was you think just look the other way. You got to fight the battle in your mind. I like the verses there, the verse in 2 Corinthians chapter number 10, verse 5. Here's what it is. Casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. You see something and your mind is tempted to keep looking so it can start drifting. The Bible says, no, take it captive. These are military terms, casting down. They go into a city in their time. They cast down the walls. They cast down the buildings. Why? Complete victory. He says, cast those thoughts down. Don't let them just sit there. Get rid of them. Do something. Don't let it just linger. Take thoughts captive. You're not control of me. I'm in control of you, and I'm going to make my thought life become obedient to Christ. I'm not going to allow myself to think about these things. Pornography is a plague. Whether it's the mild forms of the swimsuits. That's junk. That didn't go over very well. That's garbage. Used to be a boba place down here the first year we moved in this church, and that's back when bobas were all the rage, and all the people from our church and our school would go down there and get it. One of our class members from my Sunday school class went there, and she went in by herself. Her kids were in the car with her husband, and the guy was watching pornography on the screen. The guy worked there, and she said, "You shouldn't do that. What if kids come in?" The guy goes, whatever. He didn't listen to her. She told me Monday morning I went down there. I talked to the manager. I told her exactly what happened. I said, you know what? Our church, half the people from our church know there. You know who they are. We're going to go back to church and tell them to never come back there again and tell them what's going on. She's like, I am so sorry. I'm going to take care of this. Why? It would have been easy for her to say, that's a small thing. But we had our school kids, our people from our families are going to this place and they're going to watch pornography. Come on now. Someone's got to say something. They say, well, we're going to watch it. That's their prerogative, but we have the right to get up and say, stay away from there. That place is dangerous. Careful. Magazines, internet, everything sells with women. By the way, it cracks me up. Women are, and I get it. We want to be equal with men, and we want to get jobs and all these places because we're equal with you, and then you dress a certain way to draw attention to yourself. So you want to be like a man and you do the job, but you want to get the job by dressing like a way that, come on. You know that little song, oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Number 2, see the consequences of your immoral actions. See the consequences of your immoral actions. Proverbs chapter 6, we continues from verse 25 that we looked at in the first point. For by means of a whorish woman, a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. Can a man take, and this is all in the context of immorality. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? That's rhetorical. Can one go upon hot coals and his feet not be burned? It's not talking about these voodoo guys that do it, okay? I don't know if they have plastic on their feet or what they're doing, but you walk on, you're going to burn your feet. If you grab something hot, put it in your bosom, you're going to be burned. So he that goeth into his neighbor's wife, whosoever toucheth her shall not be innocent. What happens is we're caught by what we see, we dwell on it in our mind, and the opportunity presents itself, and we act on it in life. That's why we all need to be careful. Okay? You know, accountability is good. But one thing we need to know is we need to understand the consequences of that action before we ever decide to get involved with it. It's not the end of the story. Once we do the act, that's not the end of the story. How many remember Paul Harvey? Anybody remember him? Okay, when I used to work many, many years ago, 30 years ago, in the warehouse, when I first moved back here, we would listen to radio as we worked, and I listened to these news stations. And there was a little 5-minute show with Paul Harvey, and he called it The Rest of the Story. And he would tell you some little neat story, and he told a story one time about a guy that lost all of his money in investing it in concrete furniture. By the way, that was Edison. That's the rest of the story. You think some idiot would do that, but it's like the rest of the story, it was Thomas Edison. So he would always tell a story at the end. He goes, but now the rest of the story. Oh, yeah, you did this thing and you got involved in immorality. And, oh, well, it's done and it's over. Nope, there's the rest of the story coming. There's consequences that are coming your way. Well, the committing of an action, any action, is not the end. There are consequences. So we would be wise to consider the possible consequences of our actions before we get involved. That would help us to ever think about doing something ridiculous. Look at Amnon. Remember Amnon? You know, Amnon had a friend. Amnon, David's son, who loved his half-sister Tamar, and he thought it was hard to do something to her. He'd stayed away from her. Look at verse 13 and verse 1. It came to pass after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a fair sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. So he wanted her. He knew he couldn't have her. He wasn't going to do anything about it. He was dwelling on it in his mind, but he had a friend named Jonadab who told him, act like you're sick. Tell your dad to have her come in to feed you, and then you could do what you want. And that's exactly what he did. And he had her come in. He had everybody leave, and he forced her. Now look what the Bible says afterwards. Then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred wherewith he hated her was greater than the love wherewith he had loved her. And Amnon said unto her, arise, be gone. That love was gone. See, it wasn't love he had for her really in the first place. It was a lust. And once that was fulfilled and he realized it wasn't what he thought it was, and maybe there was some guilt, he got rid of her. Just get her out of here. By the way, he paid the ultimate price. His brother killed him. Now, I'm not for what Absalom did, but he was upset that he had violated his sister. Look at the verses there. Now, Absalom commanded his servants, saying, mark ye now when Amnon's heart is merry. He had this party, and he talked his dad into sending all of his sons. When I say unto you, smite Amnon and kill him, and fear not. Have not I commanded you? Be courageous and valiant. And the servants of Amnon did unto Ammon as Absalom had commanded. And they killed him. Amnon saw his sister, her beauty. He let it dominate his wife until he couldn't control his feelings, until someone gave him a plan, and then he followed through on the plan, and he realized the pleasure was momentary, but the consequences, in his case particularly, were quite permanent. He should have considered that before. What are some of the things these verses mention? Let me just go through them quickly. He talks about poverty. Look at verse 26. For by means of a whorish woman, a man is brought to a piece of bread. It can cost us in so many ways. Financial losses too. By the way, you ever hear of divorce? Child support? I was listening to radio one time, and the guy used to play for the Giants, Michael Strahan. He had a big, big divorce, and it cost him millions of dollars. I think he was bitter about it. Because the guy asked him, he goes, I hate to bring up bad news, but what about your divorce? I mean, that thing was really costly. And he said, well, let me just tell you something. You know why it cost so much? Because it's worth every penny. Now, I don't know what that meant. It's costly. Very costly. It could cause you financially. Maybe the character that you're showing, it starts to erode your character. You need to be very careful about it. I find it very interesting. Some things we really don't think about sometimes. Reuben was the firstborn of Jacob. He had an affair with Jacob's wife, if you remember that. When it came on, Israel's on his deathbed. And he brings all his sons to bless him. He brings Reuben, the very first one. Look what he says in Genesis. Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, the beginning of my strength, that firstborn son, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Dad didn't forget, by the way. Unstable as water, thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed. Then defilest thou it. He went up to my couch. He got called out in front of all his brothers. Now, they may have already known something had happened, but listen, he didn't get the blessing. Why? Because of what he did. Someone is, let's move on. By the way, the firstborn was a position of power and prosperity, but he lost that. Also, we see there's pain. Pain. Letter B. That's verse 27 and 28. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes be not burned? Listen, if I'm grabbing fire and I'm holding it to my chest, the last thing I'm worried about is my clothes. If my clothes are burned, can I just tell you something? I got burned. Right? You bring it in close and you get burned. Can a man walk upon hot coals and his feet be not burned? No. We live in this pleasure-driven society. We want that which will make us feel better, and we're willing to do it sometimes at all cost. And the cost sometimes we don't realize is pretty great. And the pain we get is pretty great. So often people that get involved with this say they're justified in their actions, whatever the reason for their immorality. By the way, let me say this, and ladies, you need to think this through. Men usually want the, we'll call it an affair, for the physical aspect. Women, you want it for the emotional aspect. Fact of the matter is, you're using each other. A man will give you fake emotional attention to get the physical that he wants. And a woman will give the physical because she wants the emotional. Don't be brought in by either. Men, you keep your physical guard up. That's where you get duped in. Ladies, don't let some guy sweet talk you. Okay? Some guy starts to sweet talk you, it's not your husband. You tell him these words, drop dead. Let me call my husband and have him talk to you. Don't, that's just how he acts. No. Tell your husband. Let him deal with it. Okay? I don't always sweet talking my wife. I'll sweet talk them with a stick upside their head. Okay? That's garbage. I know how guys are. Guys are snakes. Let me just tell you, ladies, guys are snakes. Don't trust them. Ladies, guys are snakes. Okay. Don't say anything mean about you. Be very careful. We play each other to get what they want, and you get what you want, and all you get is pain. Oh, but you don't understand. You don't understand. I'm different. My situation is completely different. No, it's not. It's not different for anybody. We think that. I'm the exception to the rule. No, right and wrong never change. God's word never changes, no matter how much we ignore it or excuse it away. I like this phrase. I read it somewhere many years ago, and I've never forgot. I forgot who said it. But someone said, we cannot break God's commands. We can only break ourselves against them. We think that we can break God's commands and we get away with it. No, you're breaking yourself against his commands when you try to disobey them. So we must be very careful. And then the last thing he mentions is prosecution. He that goeth into his neighbor's wife, whosoever toucheth her shall not be innocent. Say, where's that going to come from? It's going to come from God. God does not take this sin lightly. Woe to the man that breaks down the high and holy fence that God has placed around marriage. And when someone tries to break in and ruin that closeness a man and woman are supposed to have reserved only for each other, better be careful. You see, marriage is God's idea, not man's idea. We didn't come up with this, God did. And by the way, I think it's a pretty good idea. I kind of like it. The family is the bedrock of society. Marriage is the most important aspect of the family. We say it all the time. You have children, you know what the most important part of your family is? That marriage relationship. Not little Oswald and little Oswalda, whatever her name is. Okay? Don't let those little kids come before your relationship. They're second place. Get that, ladies? They're second place. Okay? They are. I loved all of our children. I like when they're little too. I love our grandchildren. But you know what? That relationship that's most important is my wife and I. Because if they ever all get out of the house, by the time Emily probably does, I'll be 112. But if we ever have that happen, I mean, I was doing the math. Once we re-upped with Emily, it's like, good night. We'll be in our 60s. Once you graduate from high school. They'll say, hey, you brought your grandparents with you. Like, no. But, that's the most important relationship there. The family is the bedrock of society. Why is our society crumbling? Because our families are crumbling. Why are our families crumbling? Because our marriages are disintegrating. We need to understand that. If that relationship is broken by adultery, we have ruined God's institution and the people involved in it. By the way, that's an offense to God. Okay? The point is, and we're done for tonight, why don't we look and see what could happen if we get involved with something like that? Nobody gets into a marriage relationship and says, I want to wreck this one day. I want to ruin this. I'm getting married just because, hey, she's the only one here right now, but I'll upgrade later. It's not going to work. Okay? Usually things happen that cause this to start coming the way. See the results of the action. By the way, let me say this. Most people don't want to get a divorce. They want somebody else. That's what they want. Well, we're incompatible now. You know what you're thinking? You're thinking in your mind, you can go get somebody better. But that somebody you're going to have the feelings towards somebody else like you used to have towards your spouse. Because your character level is flawed, you get somebody else, you'll be just where you are with your husband or wife now that you are with them later. Probably a lot faster. Okay? Let's guard ourselves. Let's pray.